The Night of the Phantom Song. During our grueling 9-day, 8-night summary exercise in Taiwan, we were assigned multiple missions each day. It was somewhere in the middle of the exercise when our section was sent out for a night ambush operation in the deep forest. The terrain was rough, the air damp with the scent of moss and rotting leaves. The sun had long set by 5 p.m., and soon after, darkness swallowed the forest whole. Each section consisted of 10 trainees and 1 commander with a signal set. To simulate an actual 7-man ambush team, 2 of us played the role of enemies, while the last trainee served as a signaler, shadowing our instructor. Our job was simple: set up a trip flare and a dummy claymore mine along a dirt track below us and ambush the approaching enemies. We spread out into formation on the high ground, barely able to see each other through the suffocating darkness. The forest was eerily silent, the only sounds coming from distant rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of nocturnal insects. Trainee 1 and 7 had night vision goggles, allowing them to keep watch for movement on the track. Then, we waited and waited. But something was wrong. Our 2 enemy trainees, who were only supposed to take 1 or 2 minutes to reach the dirt track, had been gone for nearly 10 minutes. Our instructor, already irritated, clicked his radio and barked, "What the hell is taking so long? It's a short walk. Where are you guys?" Silence. Then, the signal set crackled to life, but instead of a response from HQ or our missing teammates, what came through was a high-pitched, ghostly opera song. It was not human. The notes wavered unnaturally, like something old and wrong was trying to mimic a song it barely remembered. The eerie melody sent an icy spike of fear through all of us. Our blood turned to ice. Somewhere in the darkness, something was singing. We froze, gripping our rifles tightly, eyes darting into the abyss. We weren't alone out here. The ghostly voice sang for a full 10 seconds before suddenly cutting off, leaving behind a suffocating silence. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, our PC's voice exploded through the radio, shattering the stillness. "All instructors, abort the mission immediately. Return to Platoon HQ. Now!" Our instructor didn't hesitate. He shouted for us to pack up, but none of us cared about protocol anymore. Normally, we would have carefully dismantled and accounted for every piece of equipment. But that night, we stuffed everything haphazardly into our uniforms, clutching the gear like panicked children, and ran. Just as we were about to retreat, our 2 missing teammates suddenly appeared from the downhill slope, wide-eyed and panting. "Wait!" one of them gasped. "You need to hear what happened." "No time," our instructor snapped. "Move." Back at Platoon HQ, the sight of other teams clutching their gear in the exact same frantic way we did would have been comical under different circumstances. But no one was laughing. Something had found us in the forest that night. As we repacked our gear, our instructor turned to the 2 enemy trainees. "Where the hell did you guys go?" Their faces were still pale as they explained. They had followed the exact instructions: head downhill to the dirt track. It should have taken barely 2 minutes. But after 5 minutes, they still hadn't found it. The trees around them seemed to shift, stretch, swallowing them in a tangle of twisting roots and shadows. Then, out of nowhere, they saw it. An old wooden hut. It stood alone in the darkness, its rotting walls covered in moss and creeping vines. There was no logical reason for a hut to be there. It wasn't marked on any of our maps. Then, the singing began. The same high-pitched, ghostly opera song. It came from the hut, or around it, or inside. Neither of them waited to find out. They turned and ran as fast as they could. The forest, which had seemed endless before, suddenly opened up, and in the distance they saw the glow of our torchlight and heard our panicked shouts. They had escaped. But had something followed them back? The final warning. Our PC gathered the entire platoon for a debrief. His voice was calm, but his face was tense. "You all heard what happened over the signal set," he said. "Every section heard it. That's why I pulled everyone back. We'll report this to Company HQ and follow their instructions." We were given a technical break that night, meaning we were allowed to keep our torches on, cook, and stay up, instead of being forced to sleep. Not that any of us could sleep anyway. As we sat in nervous clusters, discussing the events over whispered voices, someone raised a disturbing question. If it was just signal interference, then why did some sections hear the singing loudly and others barely heard it at all? We never got an answer. That damned route march. I still remember the night Joe disappeared. The memory clings to me like sweat on a humid afternoon, refusing to fade. It was September 1983, after our grueling 16-kilometer route march. The whole platoon was exhausted, but none of us realized, none of us even noticed, that Joe was missing. The march started at 4 in the afternoon. I was his buddy, so I should have been more aware. But we were all so focused on finishing that damn march. Joe had been struggling from the start. I remember pushing him up a long slope, my palm against the small of his back, urging him on. "Come on, Joe, just a little more," I had said, my voice barely louder than my own gasping breath. He gave me a weak nod, his face pale under the weight of his gear. I moved ahead to catch up with the rest, assuming he would follow. But when we reached the final checkpoint and conducted our head count, no one noticed. He was gone. Not then, not even after a second check. We dragged ourselves back to camp, reaching at 8 in the evening, still oblivious to the fact that one of us had vanished. It wasn't until 9:30 that I finally realized Joe was missing. A search party was organized immediately, retracing our route in the dead of night. The jungle was thick, shadows stretching long under our torchlights, every rustle sending shivers down my spine. We searched until dawn. It wasn't until 5 the next morning that someone found him. His body lay in the bushes, barely 20 meters from the track. But it wasn't just his death that horrified us. It was how he was found. His equipment was still in place, his rifle gripped tightly between his legs. His field pack was beside him, his water bottle uncapped. But his insides, his intestines, liver, and other organs had been neatly packed outside his backpack, stacked like someone had carefully arranged them for display. There was no sign of struggle, no blood splattered around him. It was as if something, or someone, had removed them with precision, yet left the rest of him untouched. The autopsy ruled no external injuries, no stab wounds, no slashes, just hollowed out. They said he must have suffered some sort of internal rupture, but that didn't explain how his organs ended up outside his body, so neatly placed, so deliberately arranged. Rumors spread fast among the recruits. Some said it was a punishment from a vengeful spirit, a ghost of the jungle that preyed on the weak. Others whispered about the old urban legend that soldiers who got lost on route marches were sometimes taken. And when they were found, they were never in one piece. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes, I still see him. I am unable to shake the image of Joe's lifeless body. And sometimes, in the silence of the night, I swear I hear his voice, whispering my name, calling me back to that cursed jungle where he was left behind. The checkpoint. During my time in the Army, I often heard whispers of strange occurrences in our company, a unit stationed right beside the sea. But for the first 3 months of basic military training, or BMT, I experienced nothing unusual. After BMT, I was posted to specialist training at a remote camp, assigned to a company at the farthest end of the base. The barracks here were smaller, each bunk housing only 10 beds. Mine was bed 6, the last on the right, positioned directly beside the window. Beyond that window, an expanse of dense, untouched forest loomed. The first week passed in grueling exhaustion. Our instructors were relentless, our company notorious for its lack of mercy. Even as trainees from other units relaxed, we were still being punished. Our officer commanding, or OC, an old veteran close to retirement, had long since stopped caring, allowing discipline to unravel among the instructors. By the second or third week, we faced our first navigation exercise, a test of our ability to traverse the dense wilderness both by day and night. My detail, those in beds 6 through 10, performed exceptionally well in training. As a result, we were given a more difficult challenge, a new set of checkpoints in a previously restricted zone. Our OC informed us that we would be navigating near an old cemetery. Though it was customary to avoid the area, we were expected to make a long detour rather than cutting through it. The first checkpoint lay deep within the forest, far from the paths others took. When we arrived at the supposed location, the description indicated that the marker was 50 meters west. Our most eager teammate, Bed 7, volunteered to search ahead while the rest of us waited at the dirt track. He ventured into the undergrowth, his figure swallowed by the darkening forest. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, he returned much faster than expected. His face was pale, his movements stiff, but he said nothing, so we continued onward. Reaching the correct checkpoint, we marked our maps and started back. But in our fatigue, we forgot to record the checkpoint number, a crucial mistake. This time, Bed 8 and I volunteered to go back. As we reached the marker once more, an unfamiliar scent drifted through the air. It was sickly sweet, overwhelming yet enticing, the kind of fragrance that made the skin crawl yet kept you rooted in place. Bed 8 turned to me, his voice hushed but firm. "Do you smell that? We should leave." Without hesitation, we rushed back to the group. Only later, in the dim glow of the barracks, did Bed 7 reveal what had happened. He had thought he wasn't alone. As he pushed through the undergrowth, he was certain I had followed him. He could hear footsteps, crunching leaves, snapping twigs, keeping pace right behind him. He even muttered complaints about the exercise, speaking as if to me, believing I was just a step away. But then, when our distant shouts finally reached him, he turned around, and no one was there. At that exact moment, the sweet scent enveloped him, thick and cloying. He had the sudden unshakable urge to stay, to linger just a little longer. But through the trees, he saw us frantically waving him back. That was when he realized I had never been with him, that whatever had been walking behind him wasn't one of us. And so, he ran. A driver's horror. It was about 1 a.m. The jungle was silent, save for the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the dense foliage. The air was thick, humid, and suffocating. 2 soldiers were driving their 5-tonner back to the company line when suddenly, the vehicle sputtered and lurched to a halt. Out of gas. Stranded in the middle of the wilderness, they were still 3 kilometers away from safety. The driver sighed in frustration, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stay here," he told his friend. "I'll walk back and get help." keep an eye on the truck." His friend nodded, shifting in his seat uncomfortably as the driver disappeared into the dark, swallowed by the thick vegetation lining the dirt road. Left alone, he sat in the cab, the oppressive silence pressing in around him. Minutes passed, then half an hour. That was when he heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was distant at first, barely audible. It almost sounded like someone bouncing a ball. He furrowed his brow. There was nothing but trees and darkness in every direction. Who would be playing ball in the middle of the jungle at this hour? He shook his head, convincing himself it was nothing, but the sound continued. It grew louder. Thump, thump, thump. The noise echoed through the night, unnatural, as though whatever was making it was slowly getting closer. The tempo never changed, only the volume. His pulse quickened, but he stayed put, gripping the rifle in his lap. He was supposed to guard the vehicle, after all. He took slow, steady breaths, forcing himself to remain calm. Then, the bouncing stopped. Silence. The jungle itself seemed to be holding its breath. His heart pounded. He strained his ears, listening for any movement. But there was nothing. Just as he was about to exhale in relief, headlights cut through the darkness. A jeep approached. Finally, help had arrived. The officer driving the jeep parked and stepped out, scanning the area. His eyes landed on the soldier, sitting stiffly in the 5-tonner. "Come here," the officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. The soldier hesitated, confused by the officer's strange behavior. "What?" "Now." The officer's expression darkened. "And don't turn around." Every nerve in his body screamed at him to obey, but curiosity clawed at him. His movement slow, deliberate. He slid out of the truck and took a cautious step toward the officer. And then he turned. A wave of nausea rolled over him, his breath catching in his throat. Perched atop the truck, bathed in the dim moonlight, was a woman. Her long black hair hung in tangled strands over her pale, rotting face. Her hollow eyes bore into him with an unnatural intensity, but it was what she held in her hands that sent ice through his veins. She wasn't bouncing a ball. She was bouncing the driver's severed head. The bloodied, lifeless skull hit the roof of the truck again. Thump, thump, thump. A cruel, twisted smile stretched across her lips as she let the head fall, catching it effortlessly, only to begin again. The soldier stumbled backward, his entire body trembling. The officer grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the jeep. "Don't look, just run." And as they drove away, leaving the stranded 5-tonner behind, the last thing he heard was the sound of distant laughter, high, shrill, and full of malice. And then, the bouncing resumed. If you like our new video format, don't forget to like and subscribe to Campfire Horror for more spooky Asian horror stories. We really appreciate it.